The sound I remember first isn't the gavel. It's the rain on the courthouse skylight, steady as a drummer who won't take a break. Harbor City turns silver when it storms. That morning it was nothing but pewter sky and faces a shade paler than usual. My brother Ezra and I were led down the aisle without ceremony, me first, shoulders squared, eyes stubborn. Him a step behind, calm like he'd ironed it on. People say twins share a temper. We don't. I keep mine where folks can't miss it. Ezra keeps his under glass. Case number 2417. The state versus Jordan Cole and Ezra Cole the bailiff, called voice ricocheting off old wood. Judge Marion Ortega climbed the bench with posture that could fix a crooked door frame just by looking at it. She scanned the room, the row of uniforms on the left, the church hats and careful suits on the right. Then she looked at us like she was counting whether truth had bothered to show up. The prosecutor, Calvin Reddick, didn't bother pretending we were mysteries. The state will show the Cole brothers stole high-value electronics from the East Harbor Depot and assaulted an officer while attempting to flee. His voice carried without shouting. Politician's smooth preacher, sure. The lights dimmed, the projector coughed awake, and the wall turned blue. A grainy video, all elbows and shadows. Exhibit A, he said, letting the words do the heavy lift. Time stamped 40 minutes before the stop. Clothing consistent with the defendants. Consistent, the kind of word that leans toward whatever you already believe. I felt Ezra glance at me without turning his head. He didn't roll his eyes. He didn't tisk. He watched the way a mechanic listens for a rattle he already knows is there. The judge's gavel landed sharp, efficient. Then the part that took the wind out of me, defense motion to expand discovery, is denied. The plea is dismissed. We proceed. The room's breath left like someone opened a back door to the storm. A uniform near the aisle let his shoulder drift into mine, not hard, just enough to leave a bruise later. Get used to concrete, son, he murmured. My hands curled before my brain did. It took Ezra 2 fingers on my wrist to stop the fuse from catching. Not now, he said, barely air. We sat. Our public defender looked like he'd slept in his car and lost the argument with the mirror. He objected low-quality gaps in the footage chain of custody thin, and Judge Ortega swatted those objections like flies. Calvin's mouth almost smiled. He turned to the gallery, threw out a line about our neighborhood's history of antagonism, and a few heads nodded before they realized they'd agreed to a stereotype with a tie on. If you've never felt a room decide your story before you speak, it's humidity you can't wipe off. The law loves its procedures. Sometimes procedure is a door that swings one way. During recess, the uniform who'd nudged me leaned back and whispered to another, laughter held behind his teeth. Ezra didn't look. He spoke without moving his lips. We're not passengers, he breathed. We drive. When court resumed, he stood. No stack of papers, no theatrics. Your Honor, my brother and I elect to represent ourselves. Chairs scraped. Somebody gasped like they'd seen a car drift toward a cliff. Calvin's chuckle carried just enough. Judge Ortega lifted a brow. Mr. Cole, you will be held to the same standards as any licensed attorney. We understand, Ezra said, calm as a plumb line. The judge weighed him, then nodded once. Very well. Proceed. The first thing Ezra did was walk toward Officer Trent Doyle, the arresting officer, like he was measuring floorboards. Officer Doyle, he said, you testified you observed us near the depot at 9:40 p.m. Correct. And the call about the theft came in at 9:55, yes. Ezra held up a dispatch printout already in evidence. Then help me understand why your first contact with us is logged at 9:52, 3 minutes before the call you were supposedly responding to. It didn't sound like a punch. It landed like one. The gallery murmured. Calvin sat still, jaw ticking. Officer Doyle blinked like the clock on the wall had started speaking. Judge Ortega's pen paused mid-note. Counsel, move on, she said, but her voice had softened half a degree. I watched the row of uniforms steel themselves. I watched Ezra's hand relax on the rail. Hope is a dangerous thing in a courtroom. It makes your lungs greedy. Then the air cracked from the back. A kid 16, maybe jacket damp at the cuffs, stood up on knees that didn't agree. Your Honor, he said, voice shaky but brave. I recorded what happened. I was across from the depot. I saw who loaded those boxes. 2 security officers moved like water to push him toward the doors. The judge's voice snapped like a belt. Officers step aside. They did. The kid swallowed, eyes wide. Name, she asked. Mateo Ruiz. Calvin was on his feet before the consonants cooled. Objection. Undisclosed witness, inadmissible video. The court will hear him, the judge said, palm down. Mateo swore and explained what he saw. Two men, not us, moving sealed boxes into an SUV, while an unmarked van idled wrong way to the loading bay. He held up his phone with hands that trembled but didn't drop it. A ripple moved through the room like a small earthquake, finding its courage. 10 minutes later, after a hurried sidebar and a lot of paper whispering up at the bench, Judge Ortega came back with her robe perfectly straight and her voice like a shut door. The video from Mr. Ruiz is inadmissible, late filing, insufficient authentication. We proceed on the remaining evidence. The words hit me where air should go. Calvin exhaled through his nose, satisfied. A couple of uniforms allowed themselves the smallest smirk. Ezra sat perfectly still, fingers pressed, so white the knuckles could have glowed. He closed his eyes for one breath. When he opened them, something had sharpened. Across the room, the clerk, Ms. Patel, lifted her gaze from a neat stack of folders and let it land on Ezra. It wasn't a look long enough to be called a signal. She glanced again just slightly toward a slim gray binder near her elbow, then back to him as if she hadn't done anything at all. Ezra stood. Your Honor, he said, we have one more piece of evidence, newly recovered city camera footage from Harbor D, authenticated within the last hour by a certified network security engineer. The affidavit is with the clerk. Calvin half laughed, half choked. This is sit down, Mr. Reddick, the judge said without heat. She read fast, lips tightened, then eased. Name of the engineer, Ava Kim, CISSP contractor with municipal IT. She's available by video. Limited proffer, Judge Ortega ruled. If the authentication satisfies the rules, I will consider it. The projector blinked awake again, this time no smear, no guesswork. 9:53 p.m., corner of Main and Concourse. A block from the depot. A dark SUV idled, curbside passenger door cracked. Two plainclothes men stepped into frame ball caps, low jackets that tried to look generic and failed. The kind of boots you can run in. One lifted a badge at a drippier in a box truck, quick and sloppy. Ezra froze the frame and zoomed the outline of a department-issued taser, the orange tip of a radio antenna clipped to a belt that rules say it shouldn't be on. A sound moved through the gallery that wasn't words. Ezra switched the feed opposite corner, now clean line, to the loading bay. The two men worked fast boxes to dolly to van to SUV, like a bad routine they'd practiced until it looked like nothing. A patrol car rolled by with its light bar, dark slowed, then ghosted on like it had been told to keep moving. Watch the plate, Ezra said, and the numbers bloomed clear. The screen changed to a departmental memo pulled under Public Records, Vehicle Assignment, Property Recovery Task Force. The plate matched. A second memo slid in Field Team Roster. Two names, Lang, Mercer. Calvin's chair squeaked. Officer Doyle's jaw clicked. In the back row, two plainclothes I hadn't noticed tried to stare at their shoes hard enough to become invisible. Silence took the room by the throat. The judge set down her pen like it weighed a brick. Mr. Reddick, she said, but Calvin didn't have a sentence left to climb. This court, Judge Ortega said, finally, not loud, not theatrical. Was wrong. The gallery erupted. Not chaos, more like a cork finally popping. Church mothers cried and didn't apologize. A reporter said, "Oh my God," out loud, and no one shushed her. I didn't stand. I reached for Ezra's hand and he took it, and we held on like we were still under a wave. When order returned, Judge Ortega's voice carried to the very last row. On the admissible evidence now before this court, the defendants, Jordan and Ezra Cole, are found not guilty on all charges. Furthermore, an independent investigation is ordered into the Property Recovery Task Force. She turned to the prosecution table. Mr. Reddick, you are suspended pending review by the State Bar and the Attorney General's office. The bailiff approached. Calvin's face did a thing you don't expect faces that confident to do, it deflated. Then the judge called two names that rang like handcuffs closing. Detectives Lang and Mercer stepped forward. They didn't look at anyone while steel circled their wrists. The room inhaled and didn't exhale until the door shut behind them. We walked out under a sky that had decided to be blue again. Harbor City's marble steps turned to mirrors in the sun. People were waiting, neighbors, strangers, A kid who could finally smile without shaking. Microphones stretched in like curious birds. I lifted my hand not to quiet them, just to give the words a place to land. We proved our innocence today, I said, hearing my own voice as if it belonged to a different life. But that's not the finish line. The people who staged this, who tried to bury the truth and nearly buried us with it, they have to answer for that. We're going to make sure they do the right way. Ezra stepped forward and the crowd bent toward him like a field in wind. We didn't stand up only for us, he said. We stood for everybody who didn't get a fair shot, for the folks whose names won't ever make a headline. Freedom isn't just walking away, it's deciding what you walk toward. He didn't need to say more. A boy near the front, Mateo, wiped his eyes like he didn't believe they were his. A woman in a Sunday hat touched my elbow and said I prayed the whole time like she'd been rowing the boat while we were underwater. We shook hands until our palms hurt. We hugged people whose names we'll never know. Ezra looked back at the courthouse, and I did too, not with triumph, not with spite, with the kind of promise you don't announce. Rain leaves a city cleaner sometimes. Storms don't fix rot, they just make the weak seams show. What we did in there wasn't magic. It was insistence. It was patience sharpened into a blade. It was a clerk who risked a glance, a kid who kept filming when fear said don't, an engineer who pulled data out of a digital grave, a judge who let proof change your mind. If you're listening to this thinking you'd never end up where we did, I hope you're right. If you're thinking you would have kept your head down maybe, until the moment you realize no one's coming if you don't stand. Me, I was the brother who swings. I learned to breathe. Ezra was the brother who counts. He learned when to strike. Together we built a bridge across a room that had already decided to let us fall. So tell us, where have you seen a story get written before the truth shows up? Where have you watched consistent with bulldoze? What's real? Do you think the judge did right, calling herself wrong, or should procedure always outrank proof? Drop your city, take your story in the comments, argue it out. If you believe courage beats bias, share this. If you've got names you carry with you, people who didn't get their day, write them. And if this lit even a small fire in you, subscribe. Not for us, for the next person who needs a crowd at the bottom of the courthouse steps, already waiting, already loud, already sure that justice is work we do together.